Hey, what's going on, everybody? Are you ready to enter the second dimension? Well, I am. Let's talk about 2D arrays today. Before we get started today, I want to give a special shout out to my man Yosef. Thank you for subscribing, man. I really appreciate you. But without further ado, let's learn about some 2D arrays. Let's get it. All right, everybody. It's time for us to enter the second dimension. Let's go ahead and open up our Java folder with Visual Studio Code. And then let's make a new file. We're going to call this array2.java. Now in here, we're going to make our class. So we're going to call this class array2. And then let's go ahead and make our main method, public static void main string array args, and let's get into it. Okay, so when we were working with a 1D array, we would establish one maybe like this. We would say int with our brackets in front of the int to signify a 1D array. And then we would say something like numbers, and then we can set this equal to something like 1, 2, 3, 4. Let's go ahead and do that. 1, 2, 3, 4. So this gives us a 1D array that we can work with. And then after that, like let's say we wanted to actually work with this array, we could do a for loop. So we could say for int I equals 0, I is less than, let's say, numbers dot length. And then we'll say I++, so we can go through. And then inside of our curly brackets, we could do something like system.out.print. And then let's just print the numbers. So we could say numbers I. And this should print out all of the numbers that we put into our array. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. And just double checking to make sure we got this right. We have numbers and our array is called numbers as well. So let's save this and run it and see what happens. So we're going to save, open up your command prompt. I'm going to go to my desktop and my Java folder. Now let's compile it. So I'm going to say Java C, and then we're going to say array2.java. And now let's go ahead and run it. We're going to just go Java array2, and we get 1, 2, 3, and 4. So that's all kind of what we expect, and that's how a 1D array is going to work. After having seen the arrays video, it's probably not too difficult. But now let's introduce the concept of a 2D array. So how could we change this example to make it enter the second dimension? It's all going to center around how we have a single bracket right here. So this single bracket is the representation that we're setting up a 1D array. So if I were to add another bracket set here, so that way we have two bracket sets, this signifies to Java that we're making a 2D array here. Now, unfortunately, this example that we have here is still only one-dimensional. Well, let's try to see how we could turn this into a 2D array and see if we can make sense of it. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put another set of brackets around the brackets that we already created. Now you might be asking yourself, well, why are you doing that? Well, kind of the same reason here, how we put a set of brackets here and a set of brackets here. We need to make sure that this is also bracketed because a 2D array is an array of arrays. So the next thing we would want to do, like let's say we wanted to create a second array inside of here, we could do it like so. I would put a comma after the brackets in here. And then something that I personally like to do, this is just something to make myself visualize this a little easier. I'll move the outer bracket down so that way I can see what I'm doing. And then let's go ahead and put another set of brackets here. And we'll do the same thing. Let's just keep it simple. We'll do 1, 2, 3, and 4. So now that we've done that, and let's go ahead and back this bracket up now, you can see kind of the makings here of a 2D array. How exactly is this two-dimensional? Well, again, one, it's an array of arrays. But two, the very same reason why I like to bump this down so that way I can have my arrays on top of each other is this is how visualizing it will make it a little bit easier. Now here's a graphic that's going to help you see how to go through the array. And inside that graphic, you can see how to access each cell. But don't worry, we're going to talk about this a little bit more in detail, and we'll bring this back a little later. Inside of here, if we wanted to print the original 1, 2, 3, 4, this is no longer going to work down here. I suggest pausing the video and trying to alter this for loop to see if you can get it to print out the 1, 2, 3, 4 in here the way we originally did it. And in fact, if you want to make it a little easier to differentiate between the two arrays, let's change this to 5, 6, 7, and 8. Now go ahead and pause it and give that a try. But for everyone else, let's continue. Now, if we wanted to print out just 1, 2, 3, and 4, the first thing we're going to have to do is we're going to have to add a second set of brackets here. Now, after we add this second set of brackets, there's some changes that we're going to have to do here to make sure that we print out the right stuff. What would that be? Well, the first thing is we would probably want to put a 0 here. Don't worry, I'll explain that in a bit. And then we're going to want to put the I in the second spot. Now, before we run this for loop, I want to call out right now that this is going to result in an error. And we'll also explain why this will result in an error. And it has to do with this numbers.length here. I'm going to make one more change. Trust me, we're going to explain this, so don't worry. Go ahead and put 2 brackets here so we can put the number 0. And let's save this. And now let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. So I'm going to save again just to make sure. Let's go ahead and go to our compiler. So let's go compile. And let's run. And you can see that we get 1, 2, 3, and 4. All right. So now let's bring that graphic back up and take a look here. So if you look at the graphic on the right, look at the row down. I want you to look at the cell that is right here. And notice if you go across that row, this number right here is not changing. The reason why it's not changing is because as long as you're in that same row, the row value will always stay the same. The only value that's going to change is the column value, which is the second column right over here. So if you look at my little mini example as a comparison, if I say 0, so going back to this, if I say 0 here, that means I'm accessing this array, and then this column number here, this I, is accessing each individual value inside of the array itself. So you can see here that I have 2, 3, 4. So if I wanted to access this 4 here, I would want to do 0 for the row and 3 for the column. What if we wanted to get the number 7? The number that we would have to put in for the row is 1 because we're accessing the second array here. And then the number we would want to put in the column here is going to be 2 because we would want to get the third value from that array. So that's why this is going to be 1, 2. Now let's go and print the second array out. So remember, since I want to print the second array, the way I'm going to do that now is by putting a 1 here. So let's save this now and let's compile and run and see if we get 5, 6, 7, 8. And you can see over here, we get 5, 6, 7, and 8. So just like what we expected. So the big secret about these 2 brackets is this first bracket here, the number that you put is going to be kind of like a cursor, like how I have my cursor right here. And this cursor says, okay, if you put 0, we're doing the very first array. And then if you put 1, we're doing the second array. Now, there's something that I did here that I said that I would explain. And let me explain why I put 0 here with the bracket instead of just doing length. Because originally, we had it looking like this. So I'm going to save this now and do it the way we did before. And I want you to take a guess as to what you think is going to happen. But let's continue. I'm going to go ahead now and run this. So let's compile and run. And the only 2 numbers I get are 5, 6. Why is that? Why did I only get 5, 6 here? That doesn't make any sense. Because we have 4 numbers inside of the array, right? In both arrays, actually, both of them have 4. Well, the reason for that is if you look at the number of arrays there's only 2. Notice that I only have 2 arrays inside of my 2D array. So since I only have 2 arrays, if I take numbers.length here, I'm not actually taking the length of each array. I'm taking the total amount of arrays that are in my 2D array. Let's do one more thing. Let's go ahead and add another array here. And this time we're going to do 9, 10, 11, and 12. So let's save this. Let's run it, the exact same code, and let's see what happens. So now if I compile this and I run it, I get 5, 6, 7. Well, the only thing that changed was I added another array inside of my list of arrays, or my array of arrays. So if I was to add another array here, it's going to actually print out the number 8, because then we'll have 4 arrays. So the big secret what's happening here is whenever you say numbers.length, or if you ever have a 2D array and you get the length of the 2D array, it's only counting the number of arrays that you have. So it's going to say, oh, okay, 1, 2, 3. You have 3 arrays. That means when you call numbers.length, this is going to change to the number 3. So the reason why when I did this, when I did the brackets with the 0 here, the reason why it worked like we expected is because what it does is it goes to the 0th array, or in this case, this very first array that we have here, and says, oh, okay, well, let's take the length of specifically this array right here. And once it does that, then it says, oh, okay, well, there's 4 numbers inside of this array. So since it only has 4 numbers, that means this is going to result in 4. And that's why we're able to get all of the numbers inside of the array. And just to drive that point home, if I was to change this to say, let's say up here in this array, let's make this 5 right here. I know that's kind of weird, but now that I've made that change, this has 5 numbers in it, right? Well, all of the other ones only have 4. So if I try to read from here, the error that we should see is an index out of bounds, and it should say something about you not having 5 numbers. So let's save this and confirm that fact. So if I save, compile, and then run, index out of bounds, index 4 out of bounds for length 4. So I got it wrong in the sense that it would say something about 5, but the major point still stands. Once this hits index 4, so if you come back and look, this is going and looking for the 4th index in this array, and notice 0, 1, 2, 3. There is no 4th index. And that's why it's going out of bounds, because that 5th number is non-existent here. But if we add one, so like let's say we added 9 here, and let's compile and run, what happens? We get 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Notice now that it worked. So that's something to keep in mind. So 2D arrays can be tricky on multiple fronts. First, it might be hard to understand how to access the value. But second, a 2D array is an array of arrays, but nothing says the arrays have to be the same size. That's why it's so important to understand the miniature aspects of the 2D array. So here, I can actually continue to say 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then this array right here could be just one number. It could just be the number 1, and then this one could also be just like, say, 2 numbers. And now that is a valid 2D array because it's an array of arrays. Now, the way that I like to look at it when I'm first starting is very simply to have an actual 2D array where they're all the same, because that's going to help you make more sense of it. But I definitely suggest you go back through and look through that second part that we just talked about, where we talked about how they can be different, and watch how that for loop worked again so you can get a better understanding, because this is definitely a tough topic. Okay, But one other thing that's also important to point out too is even though that we have a 2D array here, it's not a good idea to have a fixed number if you want to iterate through the array. So how would we actually traverse through a 2D array? We're going to need not one, but 2 for loops now. So let's erase this really quick, and we're going to make a second for loop. The way this second for loop is going to work is going to be slightly different from the one that's above it. So we're going to start off by saying for int j equals 0, j is less than numbers 0 dot length, and then we're going to say j plus plus. Now, it's always really important to pay attention to how you set this up because it's very common to make a mistake of putting like I inside of your for loop here. So just pay attention and make sure that you put j's inside of the second for loop. Now let's talk about what each of these for loops is going to do. This first for loop, and let's put some comments here at the end, it's going to control the row. So we're going to put control the row here. And then this second one is going to control the column, which is what we're going to do here. And when you see how this loops through, it'll make sense. So let's go ahead and put a print statement inside of here. We're going to do system.out.print, and make sure to do print here because if we do println, it's going to mess it up a little bit. So we're going to just do a regular print. We're going to say numbers. And remember, I is going to control the row and j is going to control the column. So let's put a semicolon here. And then once we get done with this for loop, because remember right after this for loop, this is where it kicks back to this inner portion of this for loop here. Let's go ahead now and do a system.out.print. And then all we're going to do is just print a \n here, which stands for a new line. And we'll see how this works in a second. Let's save this and let's run it. Actually, before we run it, there's one error that I caught. I actually do the same thing here that I said to avoid earlier. Remember, this is going to go through the rows. So since this is going through the rows, we don't want to check the individual array size. We actually want to check the main array size, which is going to be 0, 1, and 2. So let's save this. Let's compile and run. So we'll compile. And now we'll run. And notice we get our array to print out exactly as we expect. We get 1, 2, 3, 4 for the very first array. We get 5, 6, 7, and 8 for the second. And then we get a non-spaced out 9, 10, 11, and 12. And that's just a little bit of a formatting issue. Don't worry about that too much. But now you can see how that printed out. And this emphasizes the difference between here and here, where you can see that when we're passing through the rows, we only want to actually get the main array size because that's going to kick us through the row. And when we're actually passing through each individual array, that's when we want to look at the arrays here. Now, if you wanted to make this even better, and what I mean by better is, notice how I put the bracket 0 here? We might actually want to put the I here, because remember, each individual array can be a different size. So if I put I here, it's going to take whatever I is at that moment and use it to get the length of that current array. I know that might be a little bit difficult. So one thing that I want to point out here is you can always use print statements to see what's going on. So one thing that I do personally, whenever I'm having a hard time with a concept like this, is I would do a print statement right here, system.out.print, and I'll just do a println here. It's going to break things up and it's going to look a little funny, but that's okay. So I'm going to say the current value of I is, and then we'll put a little colon here with a space. And then now I'm going to put a plus sign so that way I can add the number I want to print and then just put the number I, or the letter I in this case. And then let's go ahead and save this. Let's copy this print statement here too. We're going to get rid of the main print that we have in here. So let's delete this one for a second. And now what I want to do is print the current value of j here. This is going to help you understand how I and j are operating with each other. So in this print statement here, Let's get rid of this one as well and save. We're going to be able to see how they play off of each other. So now that we have a print statement here in this inner for or the outer for loop that says the current value of I is, let's also update this to say the current value of J. And now let's run this and let's take a look at what happens. So let's compile and run. Now let's look at what happens and how these interact with each other. So we see that the current value of I is 0, and that's the first thing that prints. But J then proceeds to print a whole bunch. It actually goes 0, 1, 2, 3, and then I updates. It goes, okay, I is 1. Let's bring up that graphic really quick again to look at how these are working together. If you look at the graphic now, notice that I is 0. So J is taking us through the columns. J goes 0, so that's 0, 0 for the first number. Then J goes 1, so it's 0, 1 for the second number. J goes 2, making it 0, 2. J goes 3, making it 0, 3. And now we've hit the end of that particular array inside the array. So then what does I do next? I says, oh, okay, we hit the end. So I'm going to set myself to 1. And we move down 1 row. Pretty cool, right? So now you can go forward and say, oh, okay, well then J is just going to go through each column in that row. So 0, 1, 2, 3. And then I says, oh, okay, it's my turn again. I'll go 2. So now we're on row 2, which is the third row. And then it goes 0, 1, 2, and 3 again. And that hits the end of it. So that is what they're doing under the hood to help you kind of understand how I and J play off of each other. And one good rule of thumb to know is that whenever you're dealing with a data structure that has multiple levels, the way I like to think about it is like this. The total number of brackets that you see whenever you're setting up an array, if you see 2 sets of brackets, that means you're going to need 2 for loops to iterate through it. What happens if you see 3 sets of brackets? That means you have to have 3 for loops or 3 loops at least to go through it. And it kind of helps you understand how you could work to go through each one of these particular arrays that you could be dealing with. So not only do you kind of now have an understanding of how to go through a 2D array, you almost have an understanding of how to go through a 3D and beyond now with this kind of logic. Let's actually, instead of defining our own array, let's make a blank array and fill it and then print it. So let's do that together. We're going to go ahead now and erase what we have here. And remember, if you want to define a blank array, the way you do it is just by saying new int, and then we're going to put our 2 brackets here. And now what we want to do is we want to say, so in this first one, we know this is our total number of arrays that we want. So let's say we want 3 arrays. And then inside of each individual array, we want those to be, let's say, size 5, right? So then let's go ahead now and put 5 here. So that means we have 3 arrays where each array has 5 values that we can put in it that are integer values. And now inside of our for loops here, so we already have I and J set up kind of nicely in this first spot. So what we want to do is come into this inner for loop now, and let's set each of those values. The way we'll do it now is by saying numbers I in the first one, J in the second one, is equal to, let's go ahead and just set this to J. So what's going to happen here then is it's going to go through and put the number 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4 into each of the blank spots. So we should see a 2D array where every value is 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So let's put a semicolon here. Let's save this. And what we want to do now is simply copy our for loops here. Let's copy it down. So let's go right under the second for loop here, the outer for loop. And then all we want to do is do our print that we did before. So we're going to say system.out.print. We're going to put numbers I, J, semicolon. And then in the outer for loop, we just want to do another system.out.print again. So system.out.print. And we're going to do a new line. So we'll do a \n. Let's put a semicolon. So this first one, just so you know, is defining the array or filling it with values. So we'll just put or filling with values, fix the typo. And then this second one is simply just printing the array out. So this one here is printing the array. All right, let's see what our code does at this point. So save. Let's go ahead and compile and run. So we're going to go back and compile. And we're going to run. And look at that. We got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Just like what we expected. And if you were to actually say take this, this is why I really like to do this. So copy this right here. If you really wanted to go the extra mile to kind of like see it a little better, what we could do now, remember how we set this up here? If we wanted to make the same array, we could erase this, put our brackets here. Let's space this out, put these numbers here. And then it comes down to just formatting. So all we want to do is format this so that it'll accept it. Let's delete this. Let's save it. And now all we're doing is printing the array. So let's see what happens if we run it this time. And we get the exact same answer. That's just to tie everything all together. Believe me when I say this, 2D arrays are pretty hard to grasp. So it's okay if you have to go back and watch this video a couple times, but I really do hope that this helped you. And now I'm going to go ahead and kick it to Dino in the future. Thank you for taking this trip with me through the second dimension today. I hope you learned something. In the past for me, 2D arrays was something that was pretty difficult, but hopefully the tips that we covered today will help make it a little easier for you too. But that's all for today. I am DB. You are you. Let's keep rocking and let's keep learning. Peace out, everybody.